Great. So the recording is in process. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We are so excited for teaching operations management and supply chain management in the new normal, COVID-19. And thrilled today to introduce to you our esteemed author, Robert Jacobs, Professor Emeritus of Operations and Decision Technologies at Indiana University, and author of Operations and Supply Chain Management and the Core. Bob, so happy to have you here today, and take it away.
Okay. This is kind of odd because I can't see any of you, and I'm used to doing these type of sessions where at least I can see people. But I do have, by the way, I was just going through the list, and I think I've met many of you. So anyway, welcome to the session, and these are odd times, aren't they, guys? But we're getting through it all. It's funny, I'm here. My 3 grandkids are somewhere around here. Hopefully they won't come out of the woodwork on me. But anyway, they're visiting for a couple of weeks here. But anyway, it's good to talk to you. And what I've done is put together some slides that will help to guide the discussion here. I guess I invite you all to use the chat thing. Any questions that you have or any comments or things that you would like to bring up, go ahead and put them in the chat. And periodically what I'll do is stop and we can see what's in there. By the way, I've got the chat up here too. So anyway, if I see something that I can address right along the way, that's fine with me. That's normally the way, by the way, I do these types of online sessions. But it's kind of odd talking to myself without being able to see, but we'll get through it. We've been doing a lot of this recently, right, Noel? And Harper?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so it's good. But anyway, in terms of this little discussion, 3 major topics that I'd like to talk about. The first has to do with the impact of remote teaching experiences having on higher education institutions globally. So we'll just talk about that, at least my insight into that in terms of what's going on. And of course, we will solicit, if you have some ideas, that'd be interesting too. Then second kind of major topic is the recent impact on operations and supply chain management during the pandemic. In other words, what are things that have done that have happened that really relate directly to operations and supply chain management? And here I'll try to give some insight into probably the way some things emphasis will change in your courses associated with that. I know as an author, I'm always looking for, what are the really important things to update, because basically the situation's changed and all, and what things should be emphasized. And so we'll discuss some of those ideas there. And then the last topic, and this is it would be more open-ended, and I'm looking for some of your comments on this, and that's the impact on these related higher education courses that you're all teaching. So we'll spend a little bit about that at the very end. So that's kind of the agenda. So let me get started here. Begin with, I was listening, I don't know if any of you logged into this thing. Harvard did a session a few days ago, and they had more strategy-oriented types there, deans and presidents. And, I hadn't thought about it, but you guys actually switched online in about 7 days. That's how quick the switch was from regular face-to-face courses to online. That's, to me, kind of unprecedented that, so many universities are, here in the United States and really around the world could switch that quickly, but that's what happened. To be honest with you, from what I read and what I look at, it seems like online remote teaching is probably going to be the new norm. This is going to be something that's going to be part of what, what's going on. I think this this change to remote teaching probably had started, well before the pandemic. There's certainly been a lot of it, but this is going to really accelerate that movement. And so, very quick. I thought it interesting this morning in the paper. There was a big article about the boom in online teaching for adults that's going on apparently around the country right now. So there's adults are looking to learn. Everybody's gotten, a lot of people have gotten laid off, and so this pandemic is, I think, going to cause quite a shift to people looking to get certifications to learn, and certainly online is going to be a way that a lot of the capacity can be taken out. In terms of operations and supply chain management, OSCM, to me, I think it really lends itself to online, through the online experience in a good way. One thing, if you think about it, at a university, there's really, three kinds of things that could happen here. One, some of the universities have gone into in-residence type program, group type programs and things, and really intense, where students live in a dorm together and things like that. That's probably the highest level in terms of the kind of educational experience at a university that you can have for a student. And some of that's I'm sure going to take place where these groups are protected, they're going to be brought together. And of course that can be augmented dramatically by video technology and online technology and all. Certainly that's, not something that all universities do, but some of the more elite, more expensive universities do that kind of thing. A second kind of paradigm that you might think about are the hybrid type courses, which, would be a combination of, face-to-face type courses and online type courses. It's probably going to be more the norm that we're going to be seeing in the future, these types of things. And then certainly the last would be the purely online type educational experience that we've got. So and just pure online. Well, operations and supply chain management really lends itself to the online stuff. We don't have labs, that you have to go to. You don't have specialized technology that you have to use. And so, these are the types of courses that they can be done to a large extent online. Much of the material involves, the learning of concepts and techniques, and examples. Repetition is often used. So these are things that can be done, electronically pretty well. One thing, of course, especially in more graduate level courses, case studies using discussion forums are something that, we can certainly use Zoom. We can use these, WebEx and these types of systems for doing this as well. To get a face-to-face type online experience, which is good. But the electronic discussion forums, especially moderated discussion forums, can actually work quite well, for this type of material as well. So I guess my point here is that operations management and supply chain management, these are things that can be done, pretty well online. By the way, just in terms of my experience with this, for the last few years, I've been teaching online for Villanova University, actually, and so I've had quite a bit of experience, with MBA students at least, in doing that type of teaching, and so some of the ideas here are sort of over that few years worth of experience that I had now in teaching online for Villanova, and also for IU. I taught for over 10 years online for IU, before I left there a few years ago. Anyway, in terms of a rubric, you might think about, what is a vision for what this remote teaching might look like? And so let me give you at least my spin on what that rubric might be. I could see that sort of on a weekly basis that you have some type of a Zoom type lecture, probably going to be augmented by readings, where you expect the student to read material, to study material, and then you do a lecture of some sort to go over the material and bring out the high points. One thing that I like to do, just as an idea for you, in these types of lectures is not necessarily cover a lot of material, in terms of just, going over what's in the book, but rather use it to give students hints, to give them, special ways to be able to accomplish whatever specialized type of assignments do for that week or for that 2-week period that you've got. So these become more hands-on. This is how you do it. Here's some secrets. Here's some insights into the things that they're working on. This is much more value added, I think, than just going over the material that's in the PowerPoints or that's in the book, or going over the material that is available through tutorials and stuff that come with the books, for example. But rather it gets right at the types of things that they're going to be working on, and tries to help solve problems with things that are a little more difficult or whatever. So you try to make these real value-added type sessions for the students. And you don't really need, probably an hour, is an hour and 15 minutes is plenty of time for these type of sessions. And then I would expect that online problem sets to be covered to show competency. This would be probably another part of the weekly rubric that goes on. These would be automatically graded, probably multiple tries allowed. Connect, for example, it was an ideal platform for doing this type of stuff. And then the other part on a weekly basis are the online tutorials, sessions, recitation sessions. These could be things that are moderated, kind of like an office hours type session, where you're discussing problems and all. But I would also expect that, to accomplish this, you would use things like LearnSmart, an intelligent learning system for doing this. I heard people talking about this, and it had not dawned on me because I had been so familiar with it for years. But the idea that, but you might think about it if you've never used these systems or tried them before, but keep in mind with these automated grading systems and with LearnSmart and things like that, you can see exactly how much time each student is spending on different things and how well they're getting things, how many times they have to try to solve a particular type of problem. And so you can get all the way down to the individual student level of exactly, what they're going through and what they're doing, in working, on your class. I think this is quite unprecedented, quite different from the face-to-face type course that we're normally used to, where the students, hopefully come to class and some of them hide, and say very little and everything. You really can't do it in the online environment. Very visible what's going on, and I think it's very valuable. I think one thing it's interesting. I remember back in 98, 99. That's 1998, 99. In the web, we're still just starting to use some online stuff. I can remember putting problem sets up on my website and having the students solve these problem sets for class and answer questions. And it was really valuable to me as an instructor to look at how well they were doing on these, because I could tell where they were struggling and where they weren't. And of course, back then, it was tough to do because, we had to program these things in PHP, and, my background's in computer science and I could do that kind of stuff. But today we don't have to do that. LearnSmart, Connect, these things, have these things built right in. And so I think, we can take advantage of this diagnostic information to really know what we should emphasize in our Zoom sessions, and even the face-to-face sessions that we do. One thing was kind of funny. I used to do a thing in class for years where I would have a little thing, question that the students had, or a couple questions that the students had to answer and or give me input on. And you know, I used to do this online where they would do it. I finally just got to the point where all I would do is just put a piece of paper up on, you know, my lectern. And as the students would walk in class, they would just log in saying, you know, here's the first question, yes, no, or whatever their insight. Here's the second question, yes, no, here's the insight. Just write it down on the thing so that when, you know, I got to that in class, I could sit there and say, well, Jimmy, you're thinking that you should go this way with this decision, or Johnny says, got this answer on this problem. This type of, you know, information about, you know, what students think or what they believe the answer is or what their opinion is on something is a tremendous way to generate, you know, to generate interaction in the classroom and to generate this, or get students engaged in the classroom. So anything you can do to do that, you know, even if you're just doing Zoom sessions, is really important as it gets students going. So anyway, there's that. Now, I would, in terms of the rubric, bi-weekly, I would expect, you know, or at least for each module, most people, you know, break their courses up into modules, that there's some kind of an exercise, you know, that they have to complete. Could use some type of a moderated discussion forums where the students have to interact with one another. And, you know, this type of thing would be completed, you know, for a grade. I know you know, in my books, you know, we have these, and, you know, I kind of feel like I'm selling books, but you know, a lot of books have these type of things in them, but these are just my ideas. And, you know, what's interesting is when I have an idea that I think is really great, I use in class, I put it in the book. That's where everything shows up. But one thing you'll see in there are these analytical exercises that we've got. And basically those things, you know, have been written so that, you know, a student can answer those and that they can be graded, you know, because that's important. You know, there are things that students can be held accountable for. And for the most part, they can be even graded automatically just because of the way they're set up. Now, in most cases for those, there's some question or so that's more open-ended that you would have to look at in grade. But I think, you know, you do need these things on an ongoing basis that students, you know, have to complete and that, you know, they're evaluated based on. In terms of exams, what you can do with exams, you know, you can certainly use online proctored exams. It sounds like, you know, most of the learning systems have this type of capability now to do it. For a long, you know, 15-semester course, you know, you might have 2 or 3 of these things, you know, if it's a really large course that you're doing. Smaller course, you know, you might not have to do so many of them, and you might be able to do graded exercises, more graded exercises for a smaller course where you have more time to do the actual grading. But anyway, these types of things are what, anyway, I'm seeing as being, you know, the way this rubric might work. I'm going to stop here in a minute so you guys can think here about what you're going to do here. By the way, just one other slide here that has to do with course duration and semester duration. I think you're probably going to see an accelerated movement to half semester courses in undergraduate programs. You know, a lot of graduate programs have gone to this already, but I think that you're going to see this a lot more, especially as there's more competency-focused learning. In other words, you know, courses are more wired to, I've learned to do this. And I just get the feeling that this value for your education and all that we hear people talking about, you know, these days, especially now, you know, when they're talking about, you know, the fact that what happened at the end of the semester and everything, that this will become even a bigger deal, you know, next semester and all, where students are going to be looking a lot more for value in what they're doing in each course. And so I would expect that the undergraduate, many of the undergraduate courses might be split and they be really directed toward competency-based type learning. Other thing, and I read this, you know, a few schools talking about playing around with the timing of semesters, you know, and next year and in the near future. And, in the fall, for example, starting earlier and end at Thanksgiving. So there are no breaks. In other words, let's get started, let's do it, let's run through the semester, and then that's it. And for the spring, maybe starting and timing it in such a way that it starts right after New Year's and there's no spring semester break at all in the thing. So I'm not sure about this, but I've heard, I read a couple schools that are actually thinking about doing these types of things, and so you might see that. Okay, so there's the first kind of segment on remote teaching and some rubrics that I think. Let me stop at this point. I mean, Harvard, you got anything that you come up with here?
Yes, there was a question about, this one is probably very specific to the COVID-19 issues right now, but sometimes students do not join Zoom, saying that the internet issues or there's computer breakdowns. This may be genuine or it may be intentional. And is there anything that you would suggest that we can do? That was one of the questions. So, sort of having students coming with excuses for why they can't get online. And then another question was about cases and teaching with supply chain management cases as a study approach, and how to teach cases when we teach online or remotely. What's the best approach to keep students reading the material and keeping them motivated for interaction?
Well, the first thing in terms of technology, this is the new reality, and I hate to just be so hard about it, but they're going to have to figure out how to keep their technology running. Students can certainly seem to keep their technology working, get their cell phones going, and all the things associated with that. And sure, it's an excuse, but the problem is, they're just going to have to figure out ways to do it. And I think a lot of the problems that at least I've seen that students have with technology is because they don't have really adequate computers. They're trying to use a laptop computer that just doesn't have very much power, and so they'll have trouble doing online type stuff. And so I mean, this is the universities have to really come up with strong guidelines in terms of what a student needs and all. But the student cannot do an online course or an online program without having technology. And so it's just a gigantic problem from that standpoint. But it's a prereq kind of to be able to do it. As far as cases and all, I can tell you, I use cases, and the way I like to do cases in an online environment is to have two aspects to the case. One, and most Harvard cases are set up the same way. In other words, one aspect that deals with the analytics of the case, wrenching through the numbers and all this kind of stuff, and so one part of the exercise is those students have to do that analysis, and they have to in some way feed it back to me, either through questionnaires or something, so that I can see, or just a written report or something, so that I can see that they've done the analytics. I mean, now, and during the, what I would do where these analytics are more difficult, I would, in the online session, the Zoom session or whatever, I would show them things that were similar to the analytics that were in the case. Not the exact same thing, but things that are similar, and to kind of give them the hint for how to do that analytics part of the case. And I found this works really well because the students realize that it's going to help them be able to do the case. Now, in terms of and by the way, on the next week after the thing, I might come back and actually show them the analytics, on a particular thing, so that, to follow up on a case. So using the online sessions, but they have to really do the analysis, develop a little spreadsheet or whatever. Now, in terms of the discussion forum, the actual discussion of the case, what I like to do is just use a moderated discussion forum, and I'll put maybe one question up to begin with, sometimes two questions up to begin with, and the discussion forum will be set up in such a way that every student has to contribute, has to put an original thought on every question. And then I require them to then comment on each other's comments on the questions. And what I like to do with these discussion forums is run them, say, in a focus period, not over the entire week. I may open them up on Thursday and run the discussion forum through Sunday. So it's not like they got to be sitting on the discussion forum all week. That drives everybody crazy to do that. But rather, on Thursday, the initial questions go up. They're expected to put their initial answers on them, by the next day, by Friday late or whatever. They can't see what anyone else has said until they put their initial answers up. And then they're expected to comment on each other's. And then, I'll put more questions up too in order to direct the discussion, on into and then through to Sunday. So, and by the way, part of doing a moderated discussion forum like this is holding their feet to the fire. In other words, you're expected to make comments on this thing, and they're expected to be reasonable comments. And if they're not, you say, this is not acceptable. This is, this isn't good. And tell you do that right at the beginning, in the first week, 2 weeks that you're doing the thing. Very quickly, the students will realize he's serious about this, or she's serious about this. And I've seen students even going after each other and saying, well, that's not a good comment. It doesn't make any sense or whatever. And they'll get into it, and it can work very, very well for that. But anyway, so that's, one way to do a discussion. It's very difficult to do a discussion using Zoom, by the way. Go ahead.
No, that's great. I think that there's a lot of questions at this point talking about how supply chain has been such a big part of the pandemic, and they'd love to hear some of the more information about how, the stories that how the pandemic is enriching our courses. So maybe we can move on to the next two sections.
Let's move on to the next thing here, and we'll come back.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
Impact on operations, supply chain management. Here I've got really two parts to this that I would like to talk about. One thing has to do with the sudden shifts in demand that this pandemic has. For example, restaurants suddenly closed, and so commercial supplier demand, died immediately. Died within a few weeks, very quickly. Retail, grocery store demand skyrockets. So, we saw this kind of very quick shift in meat, poultry, and other types of items. Now, when you look at the supply chain associated with this, say, for example, meat and poultry, farmers, grow the cattle or whatever. Farmers send it to packaging houses where it's prepared. The disaggregation takes place, and then in distribution centers and then on to customers. So this is, it's a fairly simple supply chain, and whether you're commercial or retail, the basic steps are the same. So one would think that, adapting to this shift in demand from, commercial to much higher retail would be a fairly easy thing to do. But as it turned out to be a nightmare, complete nightmare. And we ended up with, shortages in retail stores, and all stories of farmers, who were basically, euthanizing cattle and everything because, there was no demand. So it turned out to be a very difficult thing. And if you look at really what happened, our supply chains today are really optimized by channel. In other words, when we look at meat, for example, on the commercial side, we have contract farmers, and these are farmers who are under contract to commercial distributors for these products. They go to bulk packaging type plants. The distribution is typically done through full truckload distribution, then on to the commercial customer. We go to retail contract farmers, again, but a different set of farmers who are working for these retailers. It's specialized. Retail packaging, which is much smaller, type packaging and all. Then less than truck distribution, and then on out to the retail customer. So these supply chains, even though they look to be the same, they're specialized, they're optimized by channels, highly special. And the reason for this is to focus on cost minimization, right? There's been such an emphasis on cost minimization, efficiency for a channel that this is the way the supply chains have evolved. Adopting to the change took a tremendous problems. There are articles written about how these trucking people. I mean, the truckers that are used in the commercial supply chain and the retail, they're different, and they couldn't even communicate with one another to be able to shift the capacity to the other supply chain as it's needed. So this is a major thing. It has to do with this thing that we've pushed so much on cost minimization, channel minimization, that adopting change took some significant problems. So this is something I think that we're going to end up looking at, quite a bit in the way we look at disruptions, in the supply chain in the future. Other extreme change in demand examples, oil distribution. This, I think, was one of the most interesting ones where, China shut down early on. And all this oil that was going to China, was diverted to the U.S. Of course, then the U.S. shut down, and there was no place to put the excess oil. So even still, apparently, now, there's a lot of tankers that they're being used for storage, and there's a lot, certainly the demand for oil has dropped, and it's dropped down significantly because of the pandemic. Another good example is N95 masks and infectious disease protective equipment. Dramatic sudden increase in demand. Hoarding, led to massive stockouts of this stuff. Of course, a quick ramp up in production. Well, they tried to ramp up production, but they couldn't get materials, couldn't get the type of material that they needed for the face masks and everything. Well, what do you see happen? Kind of interesting. Consumers moved to alternate sources. I mean, I don't know, I know here in the local papers, there were all these things showing how you could make a mask out of a t-shirt, things like that. And so, but anyway, so it's kind of interesting how we'll find alternate sources when the need is really there. But this is a big problem in terms of getting suppliers or getting the supplies that we're needing. Anticipated shortage of ventilators, sudden increase in demand, government allocates supply to this, government forces production right at GM, and now what do we have? They discovered, well, maybe we don't need ventilators for all these things, that the virus, pure oxygen can be used in many cases and all. So now we have a lot more ventilators than probably we need. There's toilet papers and all this. So these extreme changes in demand are things that we have to bring into the, what we're talking about in terms of a type of disruption that can occur. Service sector ones, of course, healthcare, the intensive care unit beds, need for those because of the victims. What they do, shut down life-threatening procedures and shift to capacity for COVID-19 care. So repurposing, redoing things. Certainly restaurants, big shift there in terms of demand where it totally dropped out. Now we see, these restaurants coming back on at 25%, 50% capacity. There's an interesting article about airlines and which airlines are even having a chance at this point. And clearly it's the low-cost carriers. They're the Ryanair in Europe and Southwest here in the United States. Those that have shorter point-to-point type routing and focus on a single plane, smaller planes, 737s and the Airbus 320s, are the ones that are really emerging as being the ones that can deal, with the dramatic changes, reduction in demand in this case, and it looks like they may be able to survive to some extent. The long haul carriers, American Airlines, and it's really, really difficult. And who knows when things are going to open back up in terms of international travel and all. So I think we have a lot to learn from the pandemic in terms of these dramatic shifts in demand type things that we really hadn't thought much about before. Other than this demand shift, I think a second major operations issue is decreased capacity that we've got with this. Changes in the production process, cause, social distancing, workers cannot be so close to each other. And so, we can't get as many workers on the line, fewer workers, absenteeism, all these have caused tremendous reductions in what we have in terms of capacity. We got a lot to learn from what companies actually did in reaction to this. They produced fewer products, a lot of them, only the most popular products. Let's focus our capacity on what it is that most of our customers want. Try to meet the most of the demand. Of course, we know, and this is a great learning thing, for students, that if we produce fewer items, typically it'd be more efficient. Another interesting thing is that there's an article about Harley Davidson doing this. They've decided we're only going to produce the high end, the more profitable products, and make them readily available. So we can actually shift the price point on our products too, and that can help companies that are dealing with these problems, to still keep some profitability going. Tesla's doing this, obviously, when they're bringing up their new plant right now. I thought it was funny. My wife and I, we don't normally do this, but the other day we were going crazy craving for something. We went to McDonald's looking for ice cream, and the drive-through thing. And you couldn't buy ice cream. You couldn't buy ice cream cones at McDonald's anymore. And I thought about it, these are 99-cent ice cream cones. Kind of makes sense. You could buy the slushies with the, the peanut butter stuff in them and everything, twice as expensive a product. But here you can see a great example, where a company has cut down on what they're offering, cut down on the things that are not so profitable, and moving to things that they can do more easily, have fewer things that they make, and that are also higher profit. So I think these are things that we can learn from the pandemic. That's kind of interesting. Let me do this, just a shift in emphasis of topics, and then I can open up for questions here for a minute. Again, let me see how am I doing for time. Okay. Now, in terms of the shifts in emphasis and topics, in terms of risk management, as I said, demand shifts need to be considered. In the past, we'd mainly considered supply disruptions, as the thing that we're like, how can a plant goes down, or there's an earthquake, or there's a hurricane, or whatever, but it was a disruption. But now, this idea of demand shifting, is something that I think that we have to bring into, the risk management and risk mitigation type discussion that we have. Second thing has to do with, channel inflexibility, like I talked about. Tremendous emphasis that we've had in the past on efficiency and everything, but here we can clearly see that opening this risk management mitigation rubric up to where we talk about inflexibility and how much inflexibility we have, should be another part of the discussion that we have. And then information system transparency and specialization is another thing that I think that we can bring into the thing as well, because if you can't communicate, I guess my point is that a lot of these inflexibility problems can be solved if we can share information, if we can bring the partners together that, where one loses the capacity, the other gains the capacity, bring them together through information, we can have a chance of, solving the problem, or at least getting a handle on the problem. So I think these are things that have to be brought into this risk management type discussion that we have, the topic that we have. The second thing has to do with workplace layout and design. We have not thought about this. Design for health and the safety of workers. Of course, there's the OSHA required things and all, but design because of pandemics, because of infection and infectious diseases and things like this, stuff we've not really ever talked about, and it's a whole other thing that we're probably going to have to talk about in the future. And it's not only the safety of the workers, but also the safety of the customers. I think it's kind of interesting. Cincinnati, I was reading how restaurants in Cincinnati, they were actually closing down streets there so that the restaurants could have more outdoor areas, so that they could put up more tables and that way accommodate more customers safely outdoors. And I guess this is being done in a number of cities, around the world to deal with this. So in terms of design, layout, I think this is another thing that's important. And then certainly over here, the work at home paradigms are, just a whole new thing. I was talking to my, a friend of my daughter last night. She's, lives in the New York City area, and she wanted to show me her home workstation and, the way she had it all set up, how her husband had hers set up. And everything. So this is a whole new thing, important thing that clearly, as companies move to more, working from home type things, which I think is going to probably be a big thing, in the future, that relates to operations, and it's going to be an important dialogue that we have in the future. Of course, I have some pet things here that these are things that I've already been considering, but are even showing today to be, with the pandemic, even more important, really important. Platform businesses, it's incredible to see the power of Amazon, a platform business, and what they're doing here, and how they're emerging, how strong they're emerging, through all this, through the pandemic. We have to learn more about platform businesses, and we have to teach these things, to our students. I mean, we talked services, we talked manufacturing. The third type is platform businesses, which bring these things, the customers and the suppliers together in unique ways. I think the other emerging topic that's going to come out here is supply chain finance. We see the country really pumping money into financing companies, giving them more money, making money really available to them. I was talking to these people in New York, working for some banks over there yesterday, or in New York, and the idea of supply chain finance, but the idea is simple. I mean, where you finance your accounts payable, a company finances their accounts payable so they can pay their customers off very, very quickly, so that their customers can remain strong. Companies are doing this now, and they're using a lot of this government money to make this even easier to do at really low cost. So they're not only their payables, but they're also paying off, or financing their receivables, so that they have use of that money much quicker to use. So this whole idea, this whole concept of supply chain finance is really, really important to supply chain and operations management, a topic that we're going to have to get into, I think, a lot more in the future. And by the way, this is something that I think is probably intrinsically interesting to a lot of business students as well. So let me stop at that. Yeah, pretty good. Okay, any questions that come up here?
So Bob, we have about, we're actually in our last minute of the, of the presentation.
Oh, we are, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I think this thing went for an hour, it goes for 45 minutes.
There were several questions. It's funny because there's sort of a mix between questions around teaching and then questions around sort of COVID-19 and the impacts of those. So I wanted to let everyone know that we will be following up with additional resources. One of the questions about simulations, there are multiple simulations with Bob's book that we can provide for you and have a follow-up around those resources, the simulation resources, and using those in teaching. One of the final questions too was around supply chain. It's now one of the biggest new buzzwords within the business. And what impact?
Not to sell it anymore, do we?
What impact do you see in terms of business schools, education offerings, emphasis, impact on the majors, et cetera? So that I think would be a great final answer.
This has come to us. I mean, I don't have a whole lot to say about it other than it's really come to us. You know, supply chains are, you know, this is common terminology now. I mean, this is where it's at. So this is good. It's come to us. So it's going to make a lot more interest in the courses, a lot more interest in the majors and the course offerings. So this is going to be very, very good. By the way, just a final comment here. You know, I really do believe that the use of digital technologies in college education, you know, I think this is good. You know, I don't think it's going to hurt us in any way. It leads to a really rich learning environment, a lot of consistency across professors, a lot more accountability for students and professors and stuff. And this pandemic is just going to make the acceleration, you know, to online education, you know, or, you know, at least computer augmented type education, you know, faster. So I think, you know, I think this is going to be good, you know, in the future. And it's something, you know, we all have to embrace and figure out how we're going to do it well. Anyway, any other closing things? I was thinking this thing was going an hour, and then I looked at my thing and realized it was only 45 minutes. Oh, well. When you get old, guys. You would appreciate receiving the PowerPoints. You guys you can distribute.
Yeah, we will be following up after this event with PowerPoints, the recordings, and based on a number of these questions, I'm going to put together some additional resources to make sure that we will have those available as well in the follow-up.
Okay, guys, I wish I could hear you all laughing or whatever.
Thank you so much, Bob. Really appreciate your time today and your insight on these very important areas in business right now.
By the way, guys, if you want to email me or something, you know, it's just jacobs@indiana.edu, jacobs@indiana, you know, and I, you know, go ahead and do that. Bashir, I see that you're on there. Thanks. It's good to hear from you, Bashir. Yeah, jacobs@indiana.edu. So you're welcome to do that. Okay, Steve, how you doing? Okay, you're going to shut it down?
Yep. Thank you so much.
Have a good day, guys. Have a good day.
Have a great Memorial Day weekend, everyone.
Yeah, be good.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah. I'll hang on here for just a second.